Hello everyone, welcome to the Crash MotoGP Podcast, and this week we have the Spanish Grand Prix at Jerez. It's always a personal favourite of mine. I, of course, am joined by Pete McLaren and Rob Jones. Guys, how are we? Rob, I'll start with you after the World Superbike weekend. How was that for you?
Yeah, it was an action-packed weekend, as it always is in World Superbike. A lot of great racing. Obviously, Jonathan Rea being back at the front for Yamaha, I think was a good storyline. And then a debutant winning in his first race, crazy conditions, so a lot happening. But obviously, the main names and title contenders are rising to the fore as well, with Toprak winning, Bautista winning the Superpole race. So a lot going on, a lot of changeable conditions as well. But it was a great weekend of racing.
Yeah, it was. It was a very interesting weekend, like we say, with Nicola Spinelli. We'll get on to that in a bit, him winning that race one. But Pete, we're at Jerez this weekend, and MotoGP is such an iconic... When I think of MotoGP, I think of Jerez. That's one of the circuits. It's always delivered throughout the years. You know, we've had plenty of last lap battles, last corner battles. That last corner, of course, we've had Duan Crivier, Rossi, Gibernau, Marquez, Lorenzo. You know, it's just a great circuit, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? Yeah, it's a Spanish classic, isn't it? It's sort of a traditional European circuit, quite narrow, bit of everything, fast corners, slow corners, all packed into a small space. And of course, the Spanish fans lining all of the hillside. It's all the way around the track, creates a fantastic atmosphere. You've got the town, Jerez, the town that becomes sort of taken over by MotoGP almost on that weekend, which also adds to the atmosphere. So yeah, it's always one that I think everyone looks forward to. And okay, we've had Portimao, so we have had a European race, but this is the real start of the European season, isn't it? Where we've got European races consecutively. So it all begins from here. And really, if now is when we start to see who's got the consistency to fight for the championship, maybe.
And just on that, Pete, what is your memories of Jerez? What do you think of it? What is your first sort of, oh yeah, that's Jerez in a nutshell? What's your memory?
I think a lot of them would involve Valentino Rossi. If you're going back to the early ones, the things like the celebrations, I think the toilet one, that was a classic, wasn't it, at the time? And then on the other side of things, bumping Gibernau at the last corner for victory. Was it 05? I think that one.
Yeah.
That was it. Just showed the other side of Rossi, wasn't it? If you know what I mean. We'd had the funny side of the celebrations, and then you had just the clinical, no holds barred racer who's just going to do whatever it takes to win, gets the job done, and gets the victory. And one of the rare times that Rossi was booed, of course, on the podium. So
true,
it was a unique for that reason. But yeah, I mean, Rossi, I think it was his last podium as well, wasn't it? In MotoGP, he was around Jerez in 2020 maybe.
2020, yep.
So it seems like there's a lot of memories linked with Rossi there, but then also Marquez, of course, passing Lorenzo, as you mentioned, at that final corner, a replica of the Rossi move on Gibernau from the previous years, and then, of course, Marc's big accident in 2020, which just changed everything. But also before that ride back through the field that he did, which was unbelievable, really, wasn't it? Of course, overshadowed by what happened at the end of it, but unbelievable when you think of how the advantage he had in pure dry conditions over the other riders.
Yeah, no, you're right. Come on that just later about Marquez in 2020, but I still will say I think that's the greatest performance I've ever seen anyone do in a Grand Prix, to make other riders just look like they were just standing still. Obviously the crash at the end, but yeah, that was just incredible. Rob, same question to you. What is your memories of Jerez and MotoGP? What do you think of?
Well, like Pete said, there's a lot of obviously Rossi moments that come to mind, but I think it also goes beyond MotoGP. I mean, back in the day when Lorenzo and Pedrosa were in the lower categories and they had that really, really bad feud, some of that started in Jerez, and the last corner is obviously a corner that attracts a lot of hard racing, but it's also come with its fair share of incidents. We've talked about Marquez and Lorenzo, but obviously Lorenzo and Pedrosa was quite big. But it's also, like you said, to your point about a few years ago when Marquez produced what probably is the best performance ever until obviously the crash, just the way he was making his way through the field. There was also the incident with Quartararo, who pretty much had the race in the bag, and then he had that arm pump issue.
That's right, yeah.
So it's a circuit that, even if there's a dominant rider or bike on that weekend, it's anything but a given that they're going to win the race. It always seems to throw up. Normally, a track like that is throwing up scenarios like that because of the weather, maybe. But obviously, you tend to get really nice weather every year in Jerez. but for some reason the track layout or circumstances always means it's an unmissable race. But I think, yeah, for me, the biggest memory was that performance, not only because of the performance Marquez put together, but just everything that came with it. The start of his injury problems, the start of Honda's woes, essentially.
Yeah.
It's a big, that race will go down as, I think, just a big turning point in MotoGP.
Yeah, you're right, Rob, 100%. I mean, I've covered it on our YouTube channel last year. I done a separate video to this, and I said something similar. I think is the single biggest moment in modern MotoGP when Marquez crashes, he breaks his arm. That is where everything switches. You have him struggling to come back. It takes a long time for him to get back, but Honda then, they seemingly are on the slide, and it's just, yeah, I think back, it was a COVID year as well. It was the first race back. It was in the summer. It was just, yeah, I think when maybe 20 years time we look back at this moment, we'll be like, wow, that was just, how a career has just changed. Marquez was in his prime then. He was in his peak. And we'll sadly, I think we'll never really see him at that level again. It's a different Mark who's great still, and he is an incredible rider, but yeah, a bit of him is still in that gravel from 2020. I think it's a part he'll never really get back. But just going back to memories, my first memory really, it has to be 2005. I was probably eight years old, yeah, and watching Rossi Gibana. Remember watching it on the BBC. I remember that, and yeah, it just captivated you as a young fan. You're like, what's going on? Why has he done this? And you hear the crowd booing, and you're like, Rossi celebrating. And yeah, as you said, Pete, it was probably the first time that maybe Rossi was seen as the villain a little bit, which was it was pretty cool. So it was. I enjoyed that, and hopefully this weekend we get something. We're kind of overdue a moment at that last corner, so maybe we'll get something. But let's focus on the future. I know we'll get to the Grand Prix preview in a moment. We're going to talk about Marc Marquez's options for 2025. He done an interview with TNT Sports, and he said he is open to everything, essentially. And Pete, this is a good position that Marquez has never really been in before, that he can decide, okay, I'll have a look here, I'll have a look there. What's your thoughts on those comments from him?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big difference if we rewind a year, isn't it? When he left Honda early, there weren't really that many options, were there? Most of the seats were already taken. This is a contract year. Okay, we've just had the big name Quartararo. Obviously, we signed with we had Bagnaia, a handful of others. But really, most places are free. Mark's on a 1-year deal. He's available for next year. There's a lot of seats that are free. So, I mean, he's absolutely right. He can, in theory, go to just about every manufacturer that he wants. Everyone's still got at least one seat free in their factory team. It's down to him, isn't it? What he wants to do. We know that he wants to be competitive. He wants to fight for race wins. But does he want to fight for world championships? Obviously, he wants to, I suppose. I mean, how important is that? Is that the priority? Because if it is, he's going to need a factory team, isn't he? Realistically.
Yeah.
He can stay at Gresini and fight for race wins. I think we've seen enough to know that he's going to be able to do that. So if that's what he wants to do, and he wants to have that family atmosphere and in a team with his brother, and then great. Why not stay at Gresini? But if he wants that 9th world championship, he's going to have to go realistically. The best place is a factory team. So
yeah.
Big decision for him to make, but a lot of options left on the table to choose from at this stage.
Yeah, and no, you're right, Pete. And the fact that he could stay with Gresini, Rob, there is talk that Ducati are maybe trying to change their strategy with their factory bikes for their satellite teams. It could be a possibility that they could split it between Pramac and Gresini. They give them one factory bike each, and their VR46 come into that as well. But there could be a possibility that Marquez next year could stay with Gresini, and he could be on a 2025 Ducati. That is a possibility, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. To Pete's point, I think just because of the history of MotoGP and who tends to win the championship, ideally he needs to be in a factory team or at least on the latest spec factory bike.
Yeah.
But the good thing for Marquez, if he was to stay with Gresini, is if Ducati are going to sort of change their strategy, with them bringing Fermin Aldeguer on board, as a rookie, you wouldn't need to give Aldeguer the latest spec bike. I think that could be somewhere where they could sort of look at their current strategy and think, right, we've got a rookie coming into the championship. He's still going to be on the 24 bike, whatever team, he gets put in. Obviously, it looks like he's nailed on for Pramac. But that could be where they sort of take that bike away and give that to Marquez, who has clearly shown, to Pete's point, he's going to be in contention for race wins.
Yeah.
The thing for Marquez, I think what's interesting about his future is he does almost have the pick of any manufacturer because it's a contract year for everyone. But I think it would be disappointing to see him leave Ducati after just one season, because I think to go to Ducati, he's clearly gone there with the intention of, right, it is the best bike on the grid at the moment. And I think it would almost do him some negative to then leave Ducati after just 1 year. I think he needs to stay and try and see that out for a few seasons. Obviously, he'll need a factory bike, but I think although there could be options, and we've seen Aprilia how strong they are right now, and KTM, I think staying with Ducati, based on just he needs more time with them, is the correct decision at the moment.
Yeah, no, you're spot on, Rob. I think the other options, as he mentions, Pete, you've got Aprilia, you've got, people say KTM, but personally, KTM, I can't really see the fit anymore. Maybe, I don't know if Marquez would want to ride for a gas setup for Tech 3, but it seems to me that the only other option he has outside of the Ducati, staying with Gresini, or maybe moving on to a factory team, would maybe potentially be Aprilia. I know the money aspect, people say that they're not really willing to pump out the money for that big name, but he does have history with Aprilia. He won on a Derby in 125. I know it's just a badged Spanish version of an Aprilia, but he has that connection. There is something there. Do you think Aprilia would say, yeah, we'll go for Marquez, or would they want someone younger, potentially?
I mean, would anyone turn down Marc Marquez is really the question, isn't it? I mean, it'd be a big call, wouldn't it, if you're a factory to say, Marc's interested and we are not. Especially when you're seeing what he's doing now. I think, Marc would be competitive on any of the European bikes. I think, as you say, he's building up this experience of the Ducati, which we know it's obviously a great bike, but it's a particular bike as well. There's a way you have to ride it, which he's explained many times. And he's learnt that. So as you guys have said, to then sort of throw that away and start again with another bike, maybe you wouldn't want to do that. On the other hand, if it is a full factory-backed bike and you don't have that option at Ducati, who knows? It would then become attractive. The Aprilia, to answer your question there, John, I mean, let's face it, the Aprilia with Vinales, if he can perform as he has done in the last two rounds, he's a title favourite, really, isn't he? I mean, he's won half the races this year. Aprilia have won half of the races. I mean, they're up there in contention for the best bike, and the best bike will always attract the best riders. So if Aprilia can keep delivering, even if it's with Vinales, but we've also saw Aleix, that's the only question mark, isn't it? Is it just a one-rider bike? But Aleix was quick in Qatar. He was on pole at Jerez last year, so let's see what he can do this weekend. That's going to attract people. So I'm sure, to answer your question, if the Aprilia keeps delivering race wins, it's going to be on Marc's radar, isn't it? Especially if Ducati are not able to offer him that factory chance. And from Ducati's side, the advantage that they've got now with making this rider decision is they can see all the data. I think we can confidently say that whichever rider they put alongside Bagnaia is going to come from within Ducati, isn't it? And they can see all that data. They know exactly how good Marc Marquez is right now, don't they? They can see it corner by corner. They do reports for every rider after every Grand Prix so that the riders can improve their own, their own riding. They show them, look, this is where you're strong, this is where you were weak, everything else. So Gigi knows. He knows exactly how good this Marc Marquez right now is, with the arm injury and everything else behind him on this bike after, 3 rounds. So he will know, and he'll know how badly he needs to keep him for next year, won't he? Because, as you say, these other bikes are strong. You've got Acosta at KTM, who is someone that all the factories are going to be worried about having to beat in the near future. You've got an Aprilia that's been really strong. Ducati are going to be, they're going to have to, this dominant position that they've had, it's not quite that dominant this year, is it?
It's not.
And so, Gigi's going to want the best people on the bike, in short, and he's going to see from the data exactly who they are. But the trouble is there's Marc Marquez, there's Jorge Martin, 2 obvious candidates with only 1 seat. You've got Bastianini. He's going to need to win races, I think, but another potential candidate. but there's only one ride for it. So whoever's disappointed, and we've spoken about this before, whoever gets disappointed with not getting that factory seat will surely become a target for the other factories.
No, that's great analysis, Pete. No, you're right. It's one of those luxury situations that Ducati have kind of earned themselves now. Just think about maybe 10 years ago, they had dropped all the factory spec. They went to the open concession electronics just to get, you think, all that work to get to this moment, and now they have everyone wanting to be in that team on their bikes. And I wouldn't want to be their management because they've got a really good but tricky decision to make for the future. Rob, would there be any possibility for Marc Marquez to go back to Honda? I know it seems crazy saying that. Would you think that he'd go, do you know what? Somehow, if say he won the title this year, say he went on an incredible run and got his 9th world title, would he then go back to Honda, or would you think this door is closing now because he knows how good the Ducati is?
Yeah, I think obviously he's got a special relationship with Honda. Anyone who's won with a manufacturer the amount he has would have a relationship like that, and I don't think obviously the last few years has impacted that from a competitive point of view, but I think obviously the way he's still viewed at Honda and his overall assessment of Honda, it's sort of a relationship that is unbreakable in a way.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think given his recent comments, where I think he seemed to suggest if he'd spent one more year at Honda, it would have forced him into retirement. I mean, that's a pretty negative indictment of where Honda are. And obviously this season, you hear the riders maybe say, we're making a step forward, but then results aren't showing it. If he won the title, to your point, maybe that would be right, I've achieved something. I've gone and won a title with Ducati. I've got to that magic number 9. I've sort of matched Rossi. I could go back to Honda, finish my career. But I think the competitive animal that Marc Marquez is, if he wins a title with Ducati, I think he would then want the factory team and to dominate again. And I think maybe post his racing career, he might take on a role with Honda. That could be 100%, something that...
Yeah.
I think a lot has been said about that for Jonathan Rea in World Superbike with Kawasaki when his career is maybe done. And I think something similar for Marc. But from a racing point of view, I think that door is closed unless in the next couple of years, Honda have a really big turnaround, become really competitive. And if it's not quite working out at Ducati, or he's not on the bike or in the team that he wants to be, then a return could happen. But obviously that is a long way away from happening. So I think at the moment it's staying at Ducati or maybe even bouncing around somewhere else.
Yeah, I agree. And just the KTM side of it, Pete, they've always kind of been linked as the Red Bull thing. It's just, just for the years, it's always been will he go to KTM? Of course, he rode for KTM in 125, 2009, and there's always that link there. But we've mentioned it on a previous podcast about Pedro Acosta being there. For me, it just seems like he's primed to go into that factory KTM seat. And no matter what happens this year, I think they will move him up next year. I think to Jack Miller's expense. But there's that spare seat then potentially at Gas. It's the sort of the younger brand that's seen as the sort of, just the way it is in Spain. You get a lot of Spanish riders riding Gas in motocross and stuff. So would they want to go that direction? Would they put him on a Gas, for example?
I think the point you make about Acosta is the key, isn't it? That's where they're putting all their eggs, quite rightly, I think, for the future. And he is, everyone's calling him the new Marquez, aren't they, almost? So in that sense, I think someone from KTM might even have said, why do we need that Marquez when we've got the new Marquez?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's their priority now. They've struck gold with Acosta, haven't they? And they're going to put him in the factory team surely sooner rather than later. So he'll be up there. Binder, we know, has a deal for next year already. So there's, Miller needs a seat and Augusto Fernandez for next year as well. So, everything's possible. Could Marc go to Gas? Yeah, maybe. But I mean, how would he feel about being slotted in to the non-factory team and things like that? I don't know. I think the Red Bull League is interesting, isn't it? It's a big personal sponsor of his, but I think we're all expecting to see a bit more Red Bull on the Gresini bike, won't we, this year? To go with Marc, having been on the Honda, wasn't it? There was a sort of just below Repsol, they were the number 2 sponsor, and yet we haven't seen that. So maybe they're happy to just back Marc as a personal sponsor wherever he might go. Actually, that then coming back to Ducati, of course, they're not with Red Bull, are they? The
They're
factory
Monster,
Ducati
yeah.
team. They're with Monster. So there's another little complication there. But I think we've seen in the past that when it comes down to it, that if the rider makes a decision, if they can't take their sponsor with them, they can't take their sponsor with them. They'll
Exactly.
take the decision, won't they?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's really interesting because I see a lot of that online as well. People saying, well, he couldn't go to the factory Ducati team because he's a Red Bull athlete and they're Monster. I'm like, well, listen, trust me. If they want the best bike and say they got offered a considerable amount of money for it, I think the change could be no problem. If it's only for a year or two, yeah, you go back to your sponsor after. That's no real, it's not the biggest issue. But yeah, no, good chat, guys. I enjoyed that. I don't know when this is going to start ramping up with Marquez. I think something tells me that Alicia Spargo, Aprilia, when he makes his decisions, you don't know. It could be by Mugello. Who knows? It could rumble on for months to come. But yeah, keep an eye on that. And of course, we'll have plenty of news covering that throughout the season. Let's get on to this weekend. So, Jerez, it's one of you mentioned, it's a circuit that's maybe MotoGP bikes have kind of outgrown now. It's a tight circuit. But Ducati have a great record around it recently. They've won the past 3 Grand Prix at it. Jack Miller won in 21 and Pecco won it in 22 and 23. Surely, Rob, they start this weekend as the favourite, just going off their track record in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like you said, to have won the last 3 Grand Prix, a very different circuit to COTA, that's for sure. But we know that the Ducati works everywhere now. To have the performance they've had in recent years at Jerez and to now in turn also have probably their best lineup of riders that they've ever had. You put 2 and 2 together and they should be in the mix for the win. And I think obviously on home soil, Marc Marquez, this could be a weekend for him. Obviously Martin will want to bounce back to being off the podium for the first time. And then you've got Bagnaia, who was victorious. So I think they've got plenty of riders who are going to be in the mix. And I think they do start as favourite. KTM did show a lot of promise there last year.
Yeah.
Obviously with Danny Pedrosa, who's going to be in action again. We'll get onto that. But Miller has always gone really well, whether it was with Ducati or KTM. I think Binder won the sprint last year.
Yeah, correct, yeah.
So KTM, I think, obviously Vinales' performance at COTA, you have to just put him and Aprilia in the mix before the weekend's begun. But I think Ducati start as favourites with KTM being very, very close. And obviously there's the added element this year of Pedro Acosta and what he could maybe deliver. So
exactly.
There's a lot of potential, but I think Ducati do start as the favourite.
Yeah, Pete, big weekend for Bagnaia. Like I say, he's going for a hat-trick and Grand Prix wins around here. So, and he is the world champion and hasn't gone his way the past few rounds. He's struggled with chattering issues. He just hasn't really looked like his normal self in the Grand Prix. But surely he knows coming here, he'll fancy his chances for a podium, at least in both races, surely.
Yeah, he'll want to re-establish himself, won't he, as you say, as the top dog at Ducati after these sort of difficult few rounds and races that he's had. When you were saying that Ducati won the last 3 rounds, I just can't help but thinking back to the times when the Ducati wouldn't turn. You remember when tracks like Jerez were horrific for them because there's no real straight, is there? I don't think they get into top gear even at Jerez. They probably touch 5th, not 6th, but... and to think that they've gone so far, that's how much the bike has progressed, at a track that's basically all corners, and they've been unbeatable for the past 3 years. So, yeah, massive progress that Ducati have made, with GG and everything else over the past couple of years. Surely they're going to be strong, but as you guys have quite rightly said, KTM, awesome last year, weren't they?
Yeah.
With Binder, with Pedrosa, with Miller, and this year we throw Acosta in that mix as well. So I think Ducati are going to face some tough opposition, and actually on the KTM side, they really need to step up now. We've seen Aprilia shine. We've seen Ducati shine. Now it's time for KTM to show that, yeah, we can win Grand Prix as well, because it's been a couple of years, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. It's a very difficult circuit to overtake on, Rob, and because MotoGP bikes have got so much aerodynamics on them now, we've seen that shift. I'd say maybe a 5-year period where these bikes have just... the amount of dirty air comes off them, it's so hard to follow behind someone. How are we expecting this weekend to go in terms of, are we going to get someone that's going to maybe just stay out front and dominate, or do you think we could get a really good battle between a lot of people? Because we did get that last year with like I said, the KTMs and the Bagnaia. So it was okay last year, but this year, could it be different?
I think it will be, actually. I think there will be quite a few riders in the mix. I think it will be a very, very competitive race. Whether it will be Kota, that will be hard to replicate, because I think that's one of the best Grand Prix we've had in a long time. But I think Jerez this year is probably going to be one of the, I don't want to put the, jinx it, but I think it's going to be one of the best Spanish Grand Prix we've had.
Yeah.
Just because of how many different bikes are competitive, but also how many riders on those bikes are competitive. And I think the good thing with Jerez as well is it's a circuit, like Pete mentioned, where bikes aren't getting into sixth gear. It's not a top speed driven track where a Ducati or a KTM could sort of blast away on the straight and make their advantage there. Or at the same time, a bit like Kota, I don't think it's going to be super dependent on tyre conservation.
Yeah.
So I think you are going to get a race where riders are going a bit more like flat out. Obviously, you've got someone like Acosta, wherever he has been, he hasn't really worried about tyre degradation. He's just gone flat out anyway. But I think this weekend, especially in the sprint, it's going to be qualifying laps. And it's going to be very, very intense. And I just think the nature of that and the way the circuit is, it's going to keep a big group at the front.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Rob. I think, actually, when you think about Acosta, just the way he was in Kota, and the way he was in Portimao, and the way he was in Qatar, Spanish crowd, home crowd, yeah, I think he's going to be an absolute weapon, to be honest. I think he's going to be great. We'll come on to KTM now. Like you mentioned, Rob, Binder did win the sprint here last year, and he put a really great performance in the finish P2 in the Grand Prix. I thought last year in the last lap, I rewatched it this morning, I thought, why did Brad Binder not send it on Bagnaia at the last corner? But he didn't want to risk it. He wants to bounce back as well, Pete. He's had a few difficult rounds, and maybe not where he's expected. Yes, he has had some injury problems, but it's a circuit that he is very quick around. And having, of course, Danny Pedrosa here as well. He has Jack Miller, who's very quick around here. He won his first race on the Ducati here, and he was very strong last year. He was on the podium as well. KTM have a really good chance this weekend, don't they?
I think they do, yeah. And as you say, he's had Acosta, hasn't he, come in the last few races and finish on the podium. So there's that little bit of a push for all of the other KTM riders to step up. Then you throw Danny Pedrosa in there as well, who we know is going to be fast, isn't he? He's been testing around there privately, and he knows how fast he is. He wouldn't have entered as a wild card if he didn't know that he was going to be fast, would he? So Danny's going to be up there as well. So there's two names, if you like, that Binder knows are going to be pushing. As you say, Jack Miller as well has been strong there, so you can expect him up there. So yeah, I think, as I say, I think it's a big one for KTM. I think going back to last year's race, as you mentioned, I remember Binder was asked, well, why didn't you go for a lunge at the end? Do you remember there was all that fuss about the penalties? There wasn't there?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And he said, and he did admit that it was kind of on his mind that if he did that, he'd end up, getting penalised and everything else. So that was why he held back. We had that funny give back a place penalty to, was it Pecco when he passed Jack Miller?
Right.
We had Quartararo getting the long lap when he sort of got caught up in that tangle and the red flags. So it was a bit of a, thankfully those sort of penalties seem to be in the past, so let's hope that if we're in that situation again, and I think, what was he, about 0.2 behind Bagnaia at the line on the last lap, that this time that he does feel, or anyone else, that they can go for it at the final corner and they're not going to get penalised as long as they both riders stay upright.
What do you think of Pedrosa this weekend, Pete? What is his, I know his role is test rider, but will he be doing a bit of both, testing a few things, but then be told, okay, Danny, you can go ahead and do what you've done in your last two wildcards. You can be super fast and just really enjoy yourself out there.
I think he's going into it to be competitive. I mean, but saying that, we saw at Misano, didn't we? Up go the garage doors and there's a carbon fibre frame.
Exactly.
So who knows what they're going to do this weekend? I mean, there could be a second version of the carbon fibre frame. We don't know. It's hard to know, but I think certainly when Danny does these wildcards, he prepares for them in the tests. So he's working on the qualifying, trying to work on that intensity, that approaching everything. Nothing is left to chance. He doesn't go into this kind of like, oh yeah, I'll do a wild card and see how it goes. He's all business, and so I think it'll be a mix. I mean, even if they don't put parts on the bike, and I think there will be some, you've got to imagine there's some things that they've been testing, they look good, and now they want to test them in the race weekend. But even if they don't, it gives Danny that opportunity to see what the KTM does versus the other bikes actually on the track. And he gets to understand when the KTM riders say, oh, the bike's doing this or the other bikes do that, he can really understand what they're talking about, so that when he then goes away to some far-flung private test on his own, he knows what to work on and what kind of things the race riders are looking for. So it's valuable all around. And Danny's all business. So whenever he does a wild card, he's not doing it just for personal glory. It's always, we need to do it because it's going to improve the program. It's going to improve the bike in these areas. And that's why they do them. It makes clear we're not just here to have fun. We're here to make the project better. Exactly. And that's what he'll be aiming for this weekend. So he's one of 3 wildcards, I should say. I messaged around a few teams just to confirm. But yeah, Savadori will be there on the Aprilia. Bradle on the Honda. It's sort of a little known rule that there's only 3 wildcards allowed at any one event. So that's it. So those are the 3 for Jerez.
It's good stuff. I think that imagine how much money Honda wishes they had now at Danny Pedrosa to be their test rider. That'd be a whole separate podcast. I think that was a big mistake not having him carry on after he finished. But yeah, we'll talk about that another day. Rob, Pedro Acosta, like we mentioned, he's had so much support around here in his Grand Prix career already, and he's only in his 4th year. This weekend, it's a massive chance, and I hope he hasn't shown any sort of pressure really getting to him, but I hope this weekend isn't the weekend where there's so much expectation. I hope he can just play it as he does. But what do you think of his chances this weekend? Could we see him win this weekend? That would be incredible, wouldn't it?
I'm smiling just because I just can't see anything phasing him. I just think what we've seen so far this season is just going to be a continuation. Obviously, if anything, I think it being a home round is just going to spur him on to do even better. He's obviously Spanish rider, but he's got Spanish sponsors with Gas. It's all there for him to go and put together a potential win, because his form, just if you take his form alone, it's right up there with the best riders on the grid at the moment. He's been incredible so far this season. And I think, obviously, Binder is carrying, like you said, a little bit of an injury, and we don't quite know. They should be competitive, him and Miller in the factory team, but we're not quite sure how competitive they're going to be. I think Acosta, again, could be the top KTM rider.
Yeah.
And I think for Acosta, what's great is he knows all these circuits. He's had previous success at a lot of them, whether it's Moto3, Moto2, or both. So I think his knowledge of the circuits, even though he hasn't been there on a MotoGP bike, it won't phase him at all. And I think this weekend is a real opportunity for him to not only win, but stake a claim again as a title contender, which does sound mad to say, considering he's 4 rounds in. But I think we have to start taking him seriously as a race-winning threat every weekend and a potential title contender.
Yeah, you're right, Rob. I think let's see what happens with Pedro. I can guarantee you there'll be plenty of Pedro Acosta t-shirts, flags, hats in that crowd. I think you're going to see a change. For years it always will be Marc Marquez, but I think we'll see a little bit more. Just Pedro Acosta is just growing so much in Spain, so I'm excited to see what he does. And what about Marc Marquez? We did mention at the start of the podcast, 2020 was maybe his greatest ever moment. He did say that he's the best he's ever felt on a MotoGP bike. In general, that feeling that he had, obviously, it came crashing down what happened after it. But he's looking to show everyone, even though I've had these struggles over the years on the Honda, after he came back from injury, he still performed very well around Jerez. I remember 2022, he had that last corner save with the elbow. It's a track he likes. And Pete, Marquez will be wanting just to continue on from Coda, won't he?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, Coda was another step. It obviously didn't end the way he wanted, but it was another step up, wasn't it? He was actually competing to be top Ducati. Let's be honest here. Forget the 23s, the 24s as well. So, yeah, I think he's going to want to, again, like Acosta, pick up where he left off and try and take it to the next level. And I think that's what he's going to do this weekend. So, yeah, he's going to be one to watch. As you say, Jerez is a track he likes. He's been fast there in the past. And, racing in front of his home fans for the first time on a Ducati, he's going to want to perform.
Yeah, and we'll touch on Jorge Martin as well. Rob, championship leader, was off the podium for the first time, which going so far into this season, to be on the podium every race apart from the last, strong form, and of course, home race for him as well in Spain. He's going to love this weekend. I can get a sense from him that he wants to perform in front of his home crowd too.
Yeah, I think for Martin, amongst all the great performances we've seen from different riders this season, he's obviously had the speed that we're accustomed to seeing. But I think his consistency is, it goes back to the chat about what Ducati might do next season. At the moment, obviously, we're not there. We can't see the data. They can't see the potential that Marc could have with more races and how it would look. But just from the complete package perspective, I don't see at the minute how you can overlook what Martin's doing, not only for that seat, but just for the title. His performances, yes, he was off the podium in Cota, but it still took a very, very quick Bastianini at the end to try and get past him. And it was a mistake from Martin, which sort of opened the door. Without that, Martin may have been able to stay ahead.
Yeah.
And on what he would have maybe seen as like a poor day to still be third or fourth, that's maybe previously Martin would have dropped to 8th or 9th and it would have maybe got to him mentally. But now a bad day is P3 or P4. And I think that's the consistency that's going to potentially win him the title this year. And I think first home round for him this season, he's going to be strong because he's naturally strong everywhere we go. It's a bit like the Ducati now. Whatever circuit is next, Martin's in contention. And I think at least for the sprint, he's going to be a contender, but I think he's got a great chance of winning either, if not both races this weekend.
Yep, I agree. I think with just how he's went about this year, and like you say, a bad day now is P4. When you think of maybe even last year when he was going for the title, sometimes the pressure would have got to him and he crashed out of the lead. Circumstances went against him. Sometimes he had a bad tire, like he said, in Qatar. But I think the mentality switch that he's had this year has just been get on with the job and just show them what I can do. And yeah, like you said, naturally he's just always quick. You can guarantee Jorge Martin will try and break a lap record. That first lap of qualifying, he'll just be straight on it. And I love that for him. It's just so fiery and how his character is. Yeah, we're setting up for a really great weekend. And Pete, we haven't even talked about Aprilia yet. And like you said, Maverick Vinales, again, another home race. Him and Alessio in home in Spain. What can they do this weekend? Because as you mentioned, they've been very strong here in the past, over the past 2 years especially.
Yeah, I mean, the way the bike is going lately, I think that it's going to be really interesting to see. They could again be the team to beat. I mean, that's the reality. It's quite interesting. You guys have quite rightly been speaking. Let's face it, Martin is the title favourite now at the moment, really, isn't he, with his consistency? And then maybe the next one is Vinales. It's not the guys that we thought, not the Bagnaia or the Marc Marquez or the Binder, or it's sort of these other guys that have come to the fore here. And I mean, the confidence that everyone at Aprilia must have now coming into this race after the past, well, really all this season, and also the pre-season tests where Aleix was very fast. But yeah, I think this is a particularly big weekend for Aleix. He was fast last year on pole position, as we've said before. Vinales, I don't think he had a very good qualifying. He's sort of struggled, but it's not been a great track for Vinales, I think, in the past. I think his only win might have come in Moto 3 or something. But so if he can be up the front again this weekend, it's almost the reverse, not as extreme as Cota, where Aleix obviously doesn't really like Cota. Jerez has not been a great track for Vinales in the past. If he's suddenly up there, at least doing what he could do on the Yamaha, I think he was on the podium a few times there, wasn't he? That's as Rob just said, being up on the podium, that's repeatedly, that's world championship contention. If you can do that week in, week out. And Vinales and Aprilia, they're on a run at the moment, and it's I wouldn't be surprised if that run continues this weekend.
I wouldn't be either. Yeah, as you mentioned, Pete, he was very quick in the 2020 race, the COVID year. He was rapid. He was actually beaten by the other Yamaha, which was the satellite Yamaha or factory Yamaha, Fabio Quartararo, who of course took his maiden victories around Jerez. That was his maiden victories in MotoGP back in 2020. Just to touch on the Japanese bikes quickly. As we've said, it's not a track where top speed is really a thing. And when I think of Jerez, I think it's a track that naturally should suit Yamaha with their characteristics in the past. We've seen Lorenzo dominate, Rob. We've seen Rossi have a fantastic race run in 2016, I believe. He was brilliant. He led it from start to finish. But from that switch of Quartararo when he was leading in 21, then had the arm pump. He got the podium in 22, which was a great race between him and Bagnaia. They traded fastest laps most of the race. But it seems that the Yamaha's DNA, that great turning ability, it's a bit lost at the minute, isn't it?
Yeah, they've obviously, to their credit, they have improved the top speed, which for so many years we were hearing Quartararo, but not just Quartararo, obviously riders before him, Vinales, Rossi, making the same complaints, which was a fundamental issue for Yamaha to sort out. Have they gone on and improved it? Yes, but I think what it's done is it's maybe made the M1 a little bit harder to ride, and they've sacrificed some of that turning ability. I don't think they've sacrificed a huge amount, but what we've seen is the likes of Aprilia and Ducati have improved in that area, which was probably one of their weakest areas. So while Yamaha probably lost a little bit of performance there, the other manufacturers have gained performance in the exact same area. So I think it's just compounded Yamaha's problem. So when we go to tracks like Jerez, which on paper would have been your Yamaha circuit, they just find themselves still in the same position because they fundamentally lost overall performance compared to the likes of KTM, Ducati and Aprilia. And I think the saving grace for Yamaha is, I guess, that Quartararo goes very well at Jerez, and he could spring maybe a Q2 performance like he did in Portimao. But obviously the same went for Rins last time out. I know Rins is still fairly new to the bike, but he wasn't able to do anything in Kota when he won there on the Honda last year. So I think it goes well beyond track specific for Yamaha at the moment, and it's just a case of whether the bike has been there, whether the bike has been good there in the past or the rider has been good there in the past. Neither is really sort of making the difference when we go to these circuits anymore. So I think they are in store for a tough weekend, sadly.
Yeah, Pete, Honda, like you said, Stefan Bradl will be testing. Is he testing anything new? Is there a new engine perhaps, or is there a new chassis? Do you know anything at all, or what would you expect from them?
Well, we know for really both the Japanese that engines are in the pipeline. They're obviously allowed to update them during the year for the concession, so it would be be mad if they didn't take advantage of that at some stage. And certainly after the after Kota, all the Honda riders were saying that there's some major changes that we need here because the bike is just not performing. It's improved on their weaknesses, but they've lost more in other areas of what they had. So yeah, it's clear that they need to make big changes. I mean, Jerez is the perfect track to take a wild card because, of course, the wild cards as test riders have done lots of laps around there, so they know the track. Maybe they've tried parts, as you say. Honda won't tell us what they're trying. They don't, it's only if you see it on the bike and then you ask the riders about it. But then, of course, you've got the Monday test as well. So you've got all of that data from the Grand Prix weekend, and then you can go to the track and test the new things on the Monday and compare that feeling with what you had over the race weekend. So it's a big weekend for the team, especially the Honda and Yamaha that can theoretically change anything on the bike. This is the first major chance to really make big changes. Obviously, the test on Monday, all of the riders will be on track from all of the teams for the official test. Should be good weather, fingers crossed. This is when they need to start bringing big updates if you're Honda and Yamaha, because it looks like they need it. And as Rob was saying, it's going to be interesting to see if those cornering qualities that the Yamaha had for years, Jerez was a dream track for them almost, and Le Mans, the next one, that have disappeared recently. This should show how far away they are, or how much they've lost that sort of cornering. The theory is that the other guys have gained it by using aero now, haven't they? That where they weren't able to get that cornering before, now they're using aero to get around that problem, and that's where the Honda and the Yamaha are lacking. So it'll be a good test in speech marks all round for them this weekend to see exactly where they are, what they're missing, and surely, we will see from all the factories on the Monday, but also I think Honda and Yamaha during the race weekend, some new parts, and they need to see some improvements, don't they? Luca Marini, we should also say, has done some private testing, didn't he, as part of the concessions at Jerez, I think. So he will have some laps under his belt as well. So maybe, let's face it, he needs a bit of a boost, doesn't he? He's been pretty much last place at the recent rounds. So, maybe that can help him this weekend, the fact that he's already ridden the Honda at this track prior to the race weekend.
I also say congratulations to Luca Marini. Him and his partner are expecting their first child as well. So some good news as well for Luca. Yeah, just a quick prediction, guys, for this weekend. Who do you think's going the sprint and who's going the Grand Prix? Rob, we'll start with you.
For the sprint, I think this is the first time we're predicting his name. I'm going to go with Pedro Acosta to win the sprint.
Very good. And what about the Grand Prix?
Jorge Martin.
Okay, very, very. Yeah, I can see it. Do you know what? That's a good one, Rob. Yeah, I can see it. Pete, what about you? You're not just going to copy him, are you?
No, I'm not even going to go for Ducati. There you are. So I'll go Binder for the sprint.
Okay.
Yeah, I think broken foot or not, he'll pull it out. And I'll go Vinales for the Grand Prix. Wow. So I'm backing Maverick to keep this run going. But let's see.
Let's see. I'll go, do you know what, for the sprint? I think Martin will win the sprint. Some of the Bowman sprint races, it's just he's so good at them. Do you know what, I'm actually going to do a flip on Rob. I'm going to say Pedro Acosta for the Grand Prix, just to be... Imagine the scenes if it happens. I can just picture him in a shark suit or something. I can just picture the celebration.
The celebrations will be...
Yeah, this is what I mean.
Rossi times 10.
Exactly. And yeah, but anyone could win this Grand Prix. I think it's one of those ones where you could have a group of 5 and you just pick their name out. You know, we could have Bagnaia in there, who I think will be very strong. Bastianini will be strong. Marquez will be strong. All the KTMs, and who knows, Danny Pedrosa might even surprise us. So that's the best thing about this weekend. But
wouldn't it be great to see Danny on the podium? It's been a long time. Was it back 2017 or something? His last podium.
2017 in Valencia. Yeah.
There we are. Yeah. I mean, he came so close at Misano last year, didn't he? So exactly. It could happen, and what a place. So yeah, I think looking outside the winners, just give him a podium. I don't mind if it's the sprint or the Grand Prix. just put him up there in front of the home fans one more time.
Everyone will be a Danny Pedrosa fan this weekend. There's just forget about having impartiality. We just want Danny Pedrosa to do well. But yeah, if you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to leave us a 5-star review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. It's completely free if you're watching it. Leave a comment. Tell us your predictions for this weekend. Always love reading them. And we'll see you next week for the review of the Spanish Grand Prix. Take care.